Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they came together, and one of them, an expert in the law, asked a question to test him. Teacher, which command in the law is the greatest? He said to him, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important command. The second is like it. Love your neighbors as yourself. All the law and prophets depend on these two commands. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Now, if you've been paying attention, you've noticed me as I hobble around. One morning here about 6 weeks ago, I woke up with a terrible pain in my foot and ankle. I suffered with it for 3 or 4 days, and then I finally went to the doctor, and doing a number of tests and asking a lot of questions, his diagnosis was that I had gout. So I asked him, I said, well, does anybody besides me and Henry VIII have gout? And he, being a history buff, also smiled and said, John, a lot of people have gout. So if some of you were there this morning in the context of that other people having gout, I suffer with you. My leg is a lot better, and hopefully it will continue till it's back to whatever normal is. Some of you are aware, and I'm sure Catherine has said something about it, that a little over a year ago, Ginger and I moved into a senior living facility in the Lakewood area of Dallas. In that facility, where they have both independent living and assisted living and memory care living, we've adjusted very well. One of the persons on the staff is a chaplain. She's a young woman, fresh out of Bright Divinity School in Fort Worth, and this is now her 2nd year since graduation. She has boundless energy. She is very creative. Now, how do you minister in that kind of a setting? Well, for someone like me coming in from the outside, it's confusing, because I'm having to learn to say debts and debtors rather than trespasses and trespassers. And every time we get to that point in a worship service that's held in the campus, we all stumble with it, because there are obviously people who have my background as well as people who have her background. Now, the Juliet Fowler Communities has its inception in the Disciples of Christ Christian Church. And it took me several weeks to recall my church history that that's a free church. It has no liturgy whatsoever, and that debts is the way they've always practiced that prayer. So I have to remind myself where I am before I know what to say, which is not at all a bad thing. I'm delighted to be here, and I managed to say trespasses without even stumbling this morning. I want to add a word to the lesson that's been read this morning, because before we get finished, I'd like to connect that with what I want to read now from the 25th chapter of Matthew, beginning at the 34th verse. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, Come, O blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you came to me. When the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see thee hungry and feed thee, or thirsty and give thee drink, and welcome thee, or naked and clothe thee? And when did we see thee sick or in prison and visit thee? And the king will answer them, Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. This also is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I think the two stories that have been read this morning from Matthew are connected. Now, obviously, they appear in the same book, and that is a connection in itself. But they're 2.5 chapters apart. But they still have something to say to us. And that's the reason why in a normal or typical worship service in any Christian denomination, something from the Bible is read aloud, and all of the people hear it together. And so it is that we read these passages, both of them very familiar passages, and we think, oh well, I'm in there somewhere. One of the things that startles me is the number of people who are fairly regular in worship and who from time to time do their own personal devotions or prayers or at least prayerful thoughts. And we've come to hear more and more, and we've probably heard preachers say more and more, it's not just being in church that is involved in Christianity. There's something deeper than that. Now, I'm a sort of an amateur wordsmith. My mother was an English teacher many, many years ago. She was always afraid that I might not graduate from high school because I could not spell. But in this position, spelling's sort of immaterial. But I'm aware that the English language is a very strange language. Its roots come from several different places, not from just one. And so, as English-speaking peoples, we are the inheritors of a lot of linguistic understanding. We also use words in a lot of different ways. When computers first became quite common, and somebody told me when I had a problem I should reboot the computer, I thought to myself, if I kick that computer across the street, I'll hurt my foot. Normally, they got the point of that comment. I make wiseacre comments like that from time to time. But it is also true that the words that are involved in that, booting, for instance, can refer to a shoe with a special process of making and wearing, or it can be a verb and talk about kicking something, and you have only to watch a football game any time during the year. The announcer will eventually say he's going to boot that ball from the 20 or 30-yard line. Now, with that having been said, let me introduce you to a word that has several different meanings, and that word is grounded. And if I say to you that something is grounded, you have your own context of living to understand it. For instance, if you're an electrician, either a professional or a rank amateur like me, you will understand that to ground an electric current is necessary so that we have lights, cooling, heating, cooking, whatever else. And that's one form of the word, to ground that electrical current. Otherwise, you run the risk of being electrocuted. So if you're a professional electrician, or think you are, be very careful to ground your electrical appliances. Now that's one use of the word. A second use of the word appears more frequently than not at DFW. But you will see an announcement on the television news that will say, all planes at DFW are grounded. And what that means is that the weather is so bad that the planes cannot go and come from the airfield. And all of the people who anticipated being on those planes are grounded in an airport. And they're usually very unhappy about that. But we may be grateful that someone has established the fact that if the weather is that bad, you want to be grounded. It's the same word of electrical current as being grounded in an airport. Now, grounded can also be used in another way. You may be well grounded in some endeavor. Catherine and I, for instance, are fairly well grounded in theology. You expect that of your pastor. But some of the rest of you are grounded in other forms of living. It simply means to have a command of the way you act and live. And so you are grounded in that subject. Now, if there are any teenagers in the congregation this morning, I would submit to you that grounding to you has another meaning. And that is, well, you've already caught the drift of that one. If you're a teenager or the parent of a teen, you know what grounded in that realm means. Now, there are times when people have a sort of an expanded view of what preachers are and do. And sometimes they see us as those who are rulers of a church, for instance, when we're really not. Or sometimes they see us as the source of all their understanding about things religious, when we're not. Have you ever been in Catherine's office, looked at her books, and thought to yourself, what in the world does that title mean? If you don't think that's enough, you're welcome to come to a warehouse I rent not too far from where I live, where the majority of my books are boxed up because I can't keep a place for them in the apartment in which we live. And it's a constant source of, where is that book that I want to read or to see something about? So my grounding in that respect is not a memorization, but it's an understanding of the concepts of the relationship between us and God. Now, all four of those and more are ways of understanding the word grounding. And now you're thinking, I hope, what does he mean for us to be grounded? And I submit to you that one of the reasons you're here this morning is that you are grounded in the faith. Probably not by accident. If you were reared in the church, you went to church every Sunday, and after a while you didn't think about it that way. If it was Sunday, you went to church. But somebody guided you that way to make sure you were grounded in the Christian faith. And some of you have been members of other denominations, and when you became Methodists, you were surprised at the sameness of some of the practices and in the differences between us and the neighbors down the street. And then the question arises, are you grounded in the faith? And therein is where Jesus was talking to his friends. When did we see you? You saw me whenever you saw one in need. Whenever you saw one of the least. What does it mean to be grounded in the faith? We in the church are very mindful of volunteers. Many of you are volunteers in this church. But I've been around churches enough to know that when the time comes for electing officers in the church, there's a lot of groaning that goes on. Oh, maybe they won't ask me to volunteer. Or what about the children in this church? Ms. Pittman came by just before service and she said there won't be a children's time this morning because all the children are in the other service. Well, I miss the children not being here because they always are willing to talk back. But they are being grounded in the faith because someone like you has volunteered to be their information person, their leader, their teacher. And hopefully in that experience you are grounded enough to give them the proper guidance that they may grow in the faith and the knowledge of the love of God. And so maybe this morning is a day when you need to examine where you were grounded. If you want to take the earlier examples, are you grounded enough that your light shines? Are you grounded enough that you obey your parents? Are you grounded enough that you do not depend upon the machinery that has been made, but on the faith that those who made it and those who fly that machinery know what they're doing? So we are grounded somewhere. We may be grounded because a doctor has said, stay at home so you won't catch the flu. It's good advice. The problem that I have with that is, who's going to take care of me when I have the flu? Or who's going to take care of you when you have the flu? Or better yet, when your doctor has the flu? And so we're grounded somewhere, somehow. And sometimes we muster the courage to investigate that grounding. And one of the ways you're here this morning is because you are grounded in the faith that is represented by the church. Grounded in a way that allows you to do those things that Jesus talked about. Visiting those who are in prison, feeding those who are hungry, and so forth. So you are grounded to that extent. And sometimes that grounding and its realization comes to you at a very inopportune time. But Jesus does not say, if it's convenient, do these things. Jesus says, this is what you see and do, because in seeing and doing you have seen me and ministered to me. Is your faith grounded in what I represent, says Jesus? Or 10 minutes after the benediction this morning, does the grounding in the faith get left behind somewhere for you? So the question then arises, are you grounded in the faith? I was pleased to watch as some of us sang the song at the beginning of the service. All other ground is sinking sand. Some of you sang it without the book. which always indicates to me you've been singing it for a long time. But think for a moment about what the author of those words means. All other ground, other than Jesus, is sinking sand. Jesus is the rock that sustains. And it is being grounded in Jesus, representing the love of God for us all. I don't always give advice from the pulpit. That's not its purpose. But I would suggest that as you investigate your own grounding, you think through the possibilities of serving God. For they are there, and they are many. I commend to you the grounding you have in the church, for it will serve as you live and as you see the Lord in ways you cannot now imagine. Where are you grounded? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.